remember thinking it's science fiction, it doesn't matter what I do. I wore these very high hooker boots.
At 75, Sigourney Weaver is Hollywood royalty, a sci-fi legend, an Oscar nominee, and a force no one dares to ignore. But behind that fierce Ripley persona and unforgettable performances lies a side of Sigourney the public rarely sees, a side that carries every struggle, every moment of guilt, every pain, and maybe even a few surprising secrets about the people she's crossed paths with. Let's get right into it. The icon who almost made Sigourney Weaver quit acting. It's almost impossible to picture Sigourney Weaver doubting herself. After all, she's Ripley, the woman who blew aliens out of airlocks, faced down ghosts with a proton pack, and brought heart to massive epics like Avatar. She's worked with everyone from James Cameron to Roman Polanski, and even at 75, she's still going strong. But once upon a time, long before Hollywood took notice, Sigourney nearly gave up acting altogether. And oddly enough, it all began in the halls of Yale, because of another future icon. In the early 1970s, Sigourney Weaver was just Susan Alexandra Weaver, a tall, striking 20-something student at Yale School of Drama trying to find her place. She stood over 6 feet tall and towered over most of her classmates, both literally and, at times, emotionally. That physical presence would later become a signature strength. But back then, it made her feel awkward, miscast, out of place. And right across the classroom aisle sat someone who seemed to never feel out of place. Someone so good, it was intimidating. Meryl Streep. Yes, that Meryl Streep. The woman who would go on to become the most decorated actor in the history of the Academy Awards. Back then, they were classmates. 2 women, born just a few months apart in 1949, both hungry to make something of themselves in a fiercely competitive program. They weren't enemies, but they weren't exactly best friends either. More like reluctant rivals. The two first shared the stage in The Frogs, a quirky musical comedy by Stephen Sondheim, which was actually performed in Yale's own swimming pool. It was absurd, experimental, and very Yale. Sigourney and Meryl were both in the ensemble, while actor Larry Blyden led the cast. From there, they would find themselves constantly auditioning for the same roles in student productions. And time after time, it was Meryl who landed the leads. Meryl got all the leads, Sigourney once admitted in an interview with the Virginian pilot. I think the fact that I was so tall, and the fact that a talent like Meryl Streep was in the world, largely discouraged me from trying acting. Imagine that. Sigourney Weaver, the future face of sci-fi feminism, nearly walked away from it all before it began. Because someone else shined just a little too brightly. But that wasn't the only reason she felt disconnected. She didn't exactly mesh with the style of theater Yale adored. The plays were heavy, intellectual, often archaic. Sigourney felt like the odd one out. Her professors didn't quite know what to do with her. This towering, unconventional woman who wasn't classically pretty in the way casting directors expected, but had an undeniable presence. She once said she felt like Yale didn't get her, and she wasn't entirely wrong. She rarely got cast in the right roles. But one person did get her, playwright Christopher Durang. Durang, known for his absurdist comedies, saw something in Sigourney, her dry wit, her timing, her physicality. He wrote roles for her. That creative partnership gave her a lifeline. Without it, she said she might have dropped out. Durang's friendship and belief in her gave her the confidence Yale sometimes stripped away. Despite everything, she stuck it out. And when graduation came, fate was funny. Both Meryl and Sigourney made their film debuts in the exact same year, 1977. Meryl appeared in Julia, directed by Fred Zinnemann. Sigourney, in contrast, had a blink-and-you'll-miss-it moment as Woody Allen's date in Annie Hall, but both were officially in. In 1978, Meryl landed her first major role in The Deer Hunter. 1 year later, Sigourney Weaver exploded onto the screen as Ellen Ripley in Alien. One of them won the critics, the other won the box office, and in many ways, they've danced around each other ever since. Meryl is the classic thespian, stage-trained, Oscar-showered, respected. Sigourney? She's the genre queen. From space operas to psychological thrillers to monster blockbusters. She's had her share of critical praise, including a Tony nomination and 3 Oscar nominations, but she's never been about the gold statues. She's about the work, the story, the character. Even in recent years, the comparison hasn't fully gone away. Meryl is cinema. Sigourney is movies. And while those two worlds don't always overlap, Sigourney's body of work continues to resonate. She even took on the role of Prospero in The Tempest in a major London revival in late 2024, proving she's never boxed in by Hollywood's expectations. But all of that, the fame, the influence, the millions of fans, might never have happened if she hadn't clawed her way through those brutal years at Yale. Because once she found her voice, the world didn't just listen, it watched, mesmerized. And her very first big-screen breakthrough? It didn't just launch a career. It sparked the first flames of tension that would follow her through the years. Behind the scenes of that now iconic 1979 sci-fi epic, a director pushed her farther than she ever expected. The director who asked her to undress for art, and almost took it too far. When Sigourney Weaver landed her breakout role in Alien, she was an unknown actress with a theatrical background and a few TV credits. By the end of the shoot, she was exhausted, slightly traumatized, and immortalized. But before she ever became the face of one of cinema's most iconic sci-fi heroines, she found herself being asked to strip for a scene by none other than director Ridley Scott. And the way it unfolded? Let's just say it tells you a lot about how women in Hollywood, even ones playing tough-as-nails roles, were still expected to bear more than just their souls. Let's rewind for a second. It was the late 1970s, and Hollywood was still buzzing from the massive surprise success of Star Wars. Every studio wanted their own big-budget space adventure. 20th Century Fox greenlit Alien, a dark, claustrophobic horror story set in space. A risky move if not for the sudden popularity of sci-fi. The script, originally titled Star Beast, really, was penned by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett. It wasn't until O'Bannon noticed the word alien kept popping up that they landed on the much simpler, creepier title. And that one word would go on to become the name of one of the most unsettling creatures ever seen on screen. But none of this would have worked without the right Ripley. The lead role, Ellen Ripley, wasn't even written for a woman. It was just crew member at first, gender neutral. But producers thought casting a female lead would give the film a fresh edge. Meryl Streep was initially considered, but she had just lost her fiancé, actor John Cazale, and understandably stepped away from acting for a while. That twist of fate gave Sigourney Weaver her shot, and from the moment she stepped on set, it was clear she had something no one else did. Tall, commanding, and grounded, Weaver brought intelligence and toughness to Ripley, while still letting the fears show. She made it real, human. Director Ridley Scott, then still early in his film career, had a very specific vision. A former commercial director with an art school background, Scott was meticulous, visual, and unafraid to push boundaries. His films often blur the line between brutality and beauty. Alien was no exception. Working with Swiss surrealist artist H.R. Giger, Scott brought the alien creature to life in a way audiences had never seen. Giger's creature was nightmarish, biomechanical, eerily sensual, and disturbingly intimate. It didn't just kill, it violated, symbolically at least. Everything about Alien dripped with tension, fear, and sexuality. Which brings us to that infamous fourth act scene. After surviving the massacre aboard the Nostromo, Ripley believes she's finally safe. She strips down to her underwear, preparing for hypersleep, only to discover the alien is still aboard. What follows is the final face-off. A lone, nearly naked human woman versus an unknowable predator. The scene became one of the most talked-about moments in science fiction history. Not just because of the tension, but because of what Ripley was, or wasn't, wearing. Critics were split. Some felt the strip-down was gratuitous. Others argued it made her vulnerability tangible. But here's the twist. Weaver herself was the one who suggested taking it even further. She asked, "What if Ripley was completely naked?" Not to be provocative, not for shock, but to reflect what she felt was the truest, rawest moment of the character's journey. Ripley had survived hell. She had lost everything. Her friends, her ship, her sense of safety. Why wouldn't she strip off the blood-soaked, sweaty clothes and just breathe? Weaver later explained that the suggestion was never about titillation. It was about power. The alien, she said, was naked the whole time. Why not Ripley? Why shouldn't a woman be shown in her most exposed state, but not be sexualized? Ridley Scott didn't say no immediately. In fact, he considered it. Early storyboards even included a voyeuristic twist, shots of the alien observing Ripley from the shadows, its inhuman curiosity piqued by her soft human form. At one point, a more explicit confrontation in the ship's shower was even floated. Ultimately, those versions were scrapped. The studio didn't want to risk it. So Ripley stayed in what are now perhaps the most famous pair of sci-fi underwear ever filmed. But that decision still drew heat. Critics accused the film of reducing Ripley to eye candy in its final moments. And while Weaver defended the scene publicly, she later admitted she was surprised by how much the focus became about her body, and not her performance. The scene stayed with her. It shaped how she thought about female roles in Hollywood going forward. It also set the tone for a career full of tension between the art she believed in and the industry's obsession with control, image, and yes, exposure. And while Alien made her a star, it also made her wary. She'd go on to work with brilliant directors, but not all of them were easy. One of them, her next big collaborator, had his own ideas about strong female leads. And let's just say, his praise for Ripley came with a sharp edge. When James Cameron made Sigourney bleed. By the time Sigourney Weaver hit her mid-30s, she wasn't just another actress in Hollywood, she was a revolution in boots. She had already proven that a woman didn't need to scream for help in a horror film. Instead, she could be the one saving the day, dragging herself out of danger, torch in hand, jaw clenched, and never asking for permission. But off-screen, the fight was just as intense. And one of the most intense creative clashes in her career came from a man known for loving machines more than people, James Cameron. Let's rewind to the early 1980s. The world had just gotten a taste of Ellen Ripley in Alien, a film that no one really expected to explode the way it did. Released in 1979, it was a slow-burn nightmare in space, directed by a then up-and-coming British filmmaker named Ridley Scott. Scott, who would go on to direct everything from Blade Runner to Gladiator, gave the film its icy atmosphere and a creeping dread that was just as much psychological as it was monstrous. But when it came time for a sequel, Scott had already moved on to other dystopias. He wasn't coming back. That's when James Cameron entered the chat. Fresh off the surprise success of The Terminator in 1984, a film that proved a low-budget sci-fi thriller could take over the box office, Cameron was young, hungry, and had something to prove. The studio handed him the keys to the Alien franchise, and he didn't tiptoe in. He kicked the door open. Cameron wasn't interested in repeating what Ridley Scott had done. He wasn't going for quiet tension and slow-build horror. He wanted war. He pitched Aliens as a battle movie, platoon in space. Loud, explosive, military-driven. But there was one thing he knew he couldn't change: Ripley. Without Sigourney Weaver, there would be no Aliens. The problem? Weaver wasn't under contract, and she wasn't going to come cheap this time around. But once she read Cameron's script, something about it pulled her in. It wasn't just another monster movie. It was personal. In this version, Ripley wakes up after drifting in hypersleep for 57 years. Her only daughter has grown old and died while she was lost in space. That gut punch of loss hit hard. Then she finds Newt, the orphaned little girl, hiding in the wreckage of a colony wiped out by aliens. For Ripley, this becomes more than survival. It becomes a second chance at motherhood. Sigourney connected deeply with that arc. She once said that Aliens gave her the rare opportunity to play a character who was both a fighter and a nurturer. Not just muscle, not just emotion, but both. That layered performance didn't just win hearts. It earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Actress. Something almost unheard of for a sci-fi action role. But getting that performance out of her? That was a war of its own. James Cameron was a man of extremes. He didn't direct from the sidelines. He was in it. Every light cue, every gunfire sound effect, every bead of sweat. He micromanaged it all. That obsessive drive made him a visionary, but it also made him a nightmare to work with, especially if you weren't willing to bleed a little for the shot. And in Sigourney Weaver's case, that wasn't just a metaphor. There was one scene, deep into the third act of Aliens, that pushed her past her limit. Ripley, armed to the teeth, storms into the alien hive to rescue Newt. It's one of the most iconic sequences in sci-fi history. Flamethrower blazing, Ripley ripping through organic walls and egg sacs, determined to save the child. It looked gritty and heroic on screen. But behind the scenes, it was dangerous. Weaver had raised a red flag before they started filming that sequence. The set was made from a strange, glass-like material, fibrous and sharp. It felt brittle to the touch, like walking through fiberglass insulation with no gloves. She asked Cameron if it was safe. Cameron, ever the confident commander, told her, "It's spun glass. It won't cut you." To prove it, he brushed against the wall himself, walked away unscathed, and said, "See? All good." Then the cameras rolled. Sigourney went full Ripley, charging in, tearing through the alien nest, grabbing for Newt. And within seconds, her hands were bleeding. Deep cuts, jagged gashes. She later joked that her palms looked like a Renaissance painting. "It was like I had stigmata," she said. That wasn't a stunt. There was no fake blood. That was real pain for the sake of real emotion. And while Weaver took it in stride, that moment left a mark. Not just on her hands, but on her memory. It was a perfect example of how far she was expected to go. How much she was expected to endure, just to make a scene feel authentic. This wasn't an isolated incident. The set of Aliens was notoriously intense. Cameron, known for his perfectionism, didn't like being questioned. He didn't suffer delays. And if you were falling behind, you were part of the problem. That kind of pressure cooked the entire cast and crew. Some folded. Others, like Sigourney, stood their ground, but not without bruises. She once said that working with Cameron was like being inside a pressure cooker. You come out transformed, but not always in a good way. The real story behind Sigourney Weaver's early years, before the movie stardom, the Alien franchise, or her commanding presence on red carpets, Sigourney Weaver's life felt like a slow-motion tug-of-war between being seen and feeling invisible. Her path wasn't made for her. She had to clear it herself, one step at a time. And it all started long before any camera ever rolled. Born in October of 1949 in New York City, Sigourney entered the world as Susan Alexandra Weaver. On paper, it looked like she had a head start. Her father, Pat Weaver, was no ordinary dad. He was practically television royalty. As the president of NBC, he was the mastermind behind culture-shaping staples like The Today Show and The Tonight Show. Her mother, Elizabeth Inglis, was a refined British actress with a Hollywood past, having appeared in early Hitchcock films like The 39 Steps. But if you think growing up in a media-savvy household meant she was handed a spotlight, you'd be wrong. Despite the glamour surrounding her family, Sigourney didn't feel glamorous. She felt out of place. Early photos show a lanky, shy girl who seemed half lost in her own limbs. By the time she was in her teens, she had shot up past 6 feet tall, an elegant height in theory, but in practice it made her the target of side eyes, whispers, and rejection. While other girls were getting asked to dances and shopping for prom dresses, Sigourney was trying to disappear into library books and oversized sweaters. She used humor to protect herself, but even that wore thin. It's no wonder she changed her name as a teenager. Susan just didn't fit anymore. She found Sigourney buried in the pages of The Great Gatsby. Not even the name of a main character, but something about it felt right. It sounded unusual, intellectual, maybe even a little defiant. It wasn't chosen to stand out. It was chosen because it felt like hers. That bold reinvention at such a young age said a lot about the girl who, deep down, knew she didn't want to just be someone. She wanted to shape who that someone would be. Still, it wasn't easy. Her early education was a carousel of elite private schools, Chapin, Brearley, and later Ethel Walker. But even in those privileged halls, she stuck out like a sore thumb. These schools weren't designed for girls who questioned everything, especially not girls who refused to wear the uniform properly or who dared to direct the school play their own way. At one point, she staged a production and gave herself the male lead, not because she was showing off, but because she wanted to stretch herself, to play with identity, to push against the rules that kept trying to box her in. Her home life was just as complicated. The Weavers lived in a sprawling Central Park West apartment with a dumbwaiter, an odd little lift meant for food or laundry. Sigourney used it to escape. She'd curl up inside that dark, narrow space to read, cry, or just breathe. Think about that. A girl who would one day own the screen in Alien, Gorillas in the Mist, and Avatar once found her only safe space inside a dumbwaiter. That's not just a quirky story. It's a glimpse into the loneliness that shaped her. The awkwardness followed her to California when she enrolled at Stanford in the late 1960s. The world outside was changing fast. Civil rights marches, the Vietnam War, the women's liberation movement, and so was Sigourney. She majored in literature, not theater, but the pull of performance was impossible to ignore. Campus theater gave her a freedom she'd never felt before. For the first time, she wasn't being judged for her height, or her sharp features, or her offbeat sense of humor. She was being celebrated for them. At Stanford, she threw herself into absurdist comedies and experimental plays. In one unforgettable moment, she appeared in The Frogs by Aristophanes, wearing a full-body frog suit and hopping across the stage in exaggerated leaps. It was physical, strange, and completely liberating. It wasn't Hollywood glamour, but it gave her something far more valuable: the sense that she could fully inhabit her own skin, and that it could be powerful. But even then, acting didn't feel like a straight road. After Stanford, she still struggled with self-doubt. The glittering path into the film industry that people assumed she had because of her last name, it didn't exist. If anything, her famous father's connections made people suspicious of her. She had to prove she wasn't just some privileged kid playing dress-up. That meant working behind the scenes, literally. She took a job as a production assistant on educational documentaries. She answered phones. She filed papers. She did voiceover work for a Sesame Street album. Anything to stay close to storytelling. And when money was tight, and it often was, she made do. One of her early New York apartments had no furniture, so she used milk crates for chairs. Her clothes came from thrift stores. There was no spotlight, no red carpet, no studio execs knocking on her door. Just long days, endless auditions, and the aching sense that she might never quite belong anywhere. Still, she kept showing up. Those early years hardened her in all the right ways. They gave her an edge, but not a bitterness. A sense of humor, but also a toughness. She learned to walk into audition rooms with her head high, even when she knew the casting agents had already written her off. Too tall, too strange, too intellectual, too something. But what they didn't see coming was that those very things, her height, her voice, her thoughtful intensity, would become her biggest strengths. She wasn't made for traditional leading lady roles. She was made for something entirely new. And that's exactly what Hollywood was about to discover. Because just when Sigourney Weaver was beginning to accept that she might never be truly seen, a director named Ridley Scott was looking for someone who didn't fit the mold. Someone who could change the game. Someone who could step onto a spaceship as Ripley and never look back. But those early years, they never really left her. They were full of rejection, self-doubt, and feeling like an outsider in every room she entered. And maybe that's why she never became the typical movie star. Because long before she ever screamed at a xenomorph, she'd already learned how to survive in a world that didn't always make space for girls like her. The private guilt and the life she nearly missed, you know Sigourney Weaver as the unstoppable force who faced down aliens and corporate villains without flinching. But behind the cool exterior and the Hollywood glow was something she rarely talked about. Something that haunted her far more than any monster on screen. Guilt. In the early 1980s, Sigourney was finally hitting her stride in the industry. After Alien and The Year of Living Dangerously, she had carved out her space in a business that tried hard not to take women seriously, especially women who didn't fit the traditional Hollywood mold. But while her career was taking off, so was something else. A life she hadn't always been sure she'd have. In October of 1984, she married stage director Jim Simpson. No red carpet romance, no flashy headlines, just two artists who respected each other's minds. That same year, they quietly started building a life together in Manhattan. And not long after, in the spring of 1990, they welcomed their daughter, Charlotte Simpson, who now goes by Char. For someone like Sigourney, who had spent so much of her early life feeling like the odd one out, becoming a mother gave her something grounding, real. She once described it not as a transformation, but a recentering. But that sense of balance didn't last long. The truth was, her career never stopped asking for more of her, and she kept giving it. By the mid-90s, Sigourney and Jim co-founded the Flea Theater in Tribeca, a space meant to give emerging artists and experimental voices a place to be heard. It was a labor of love, built during a time when they were also trying to raise a child, juggle stage work, and chase major film roles. It looked poetic from the outside, but inside, there were cracks. In a candid interview from 2010, Sigourney admitted something few celebrities ever say out loud. "Going to New Zealand to make Avatar when Char was applying to colleges almost killed me," she confessed. That single line reveals everything. She didn't just miss a school recital or a soccer game. She missed the moment when her daughter was on the edge of her own life chapter. And Sigourney? She was on another continent. That guilt stayed with her. She said she went to therapy, not just to cope, but to understand why she kept making the same choice, choosing work even when it hurt. And she wasn't blaming the industry. She was holding the mirror up to herself. Even when Jim directed the 2002 film The Guys, a quiet, emotional tribute to the firefighters lost in 9/11, Sigourney took the lead role. But more touching, Jim and Char played her character's husband and child. In a way, it was art trying to mend what reality had stretched thin. And yet, despite the pain and the compromises, Sigourney never gave up on being present. Her daughter, now an author and a professor at Columbia's Digital Storytelling Lab, has spoken about how deeply supportive her mother always was, even from afar. Char didn't grow up with the picture-perfect sitcom mom. She grew up with something more complex and more honest. As for friendships, Sigourney found her tribe not in the plastic perfection of Hollywood circles, but in fellow women who knew what it meant to live in that in-between space of fame and real life. Jamie Lee Curtis, for instance, became one of her closest friends. In a moment of endearing honesty, Curtis once admitted she'd never actually watched Alien all the way through because it terrified her too much. That kind of friendship, rooted in laughter, shared vulnerability, and decades of mutual respect, was rare in their world, but real. She's also long been close with British actress Selina Cadell, known for her work in period dramas and for having a wicked sense of humor. Selina was one of those friends who stuck around not because of what Sigourney could do, but because of who she was when no one was watching. So yes, Sigourney's life was far from flawless. She built a career that demanded everything, and sometimes took more than she wanted to give. But she also built a family that, through all the distance and delay, still held together. A husband who collaborated instead of competed. A daughter who turned into an artist in her own right. And a group of friends who didn't need a movie premiere to show up. But don't think for a second that the guilt ever fully went away. Even now, at 75, when her name is secure in the history books and her characters are icons, there's still that small voice that wonders, what if I'd stayed home a little more? What if I missed too much? The truth? Maybe she did miss moments. But she also gave her daughter something no one else could. An example of what it means to be brave, to be honest, and to stand fully in your contradictions. Thanks for watching, fam. If you found this video compelling, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel. And if you're ready for more, click on the next video on your screen now. There's plenty more to explore.